Hello everyone, and welcome to Biopedia. In episode 108, we talked about the largest snake that ever lived. Well, today is a part 2 of sorts. This is because we are talking about the world's smallest snake. This is the Barbados threadsnake, or Tetracheilostoma carlae. More specifically, this is about how this species was brought back from being thought dead. Now, the Barbados threadsnake, also called the Lesser Antilles threadsnake in some publications, is exclusively found on Barbados, perhaps unsurprisingly. The snakes are blind and use other senses to hunt for things like termites to eat. A 2008 publication describing the species lists its average total length as 99.4 mm, with snout to vent length being 93.7 mm. Incidentally, I can't remember if I've defined this before, but just in case, snout to vent length, or SVL, is the distance from the snout to the cloaca, which is a standard in measuring snake lengths. A specimen collected on the 9th of June 2006 from under a rock near Bonwell in the parish of St. Joseph's is listed as the holotype. Now, this species was formally described as separate in its own right in 2008, based on 5 specimens, 2 of which were new at the time, and from a fragment of secondary rainforest which remained in the southeast of the island. Now, this is 23 minutes away by car from somewhere called Hillaby, which is where a 2005 observation was we'll get to in a moment, so I think these are separate observations rather than a type error. The species name, or specifically its species name of carlae, is in honour of the wife of S. Blair Hedges, the author of the paper. This is Carla Ann Hass, hence the species name L. carlae. An assessment made in 2016 by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature Red List listed the species as critically endangered, but not as extinct. The report stated that it did not know over how wide an area the species was located. However, because of how little rainforest is left on Barbados, it was stated as almost definitely below 10 square kilometres. Only 3 parishes, St. John, St. Joseph and St. Thomas, had occurrences of the snake. The map shown in the report basically shows 4 disconnected patches for its distribution, and the last record listed in the 2010s was a photograph taken in Hillaby town in 2005, hence why I mentioned this record earlier. This record was in the St. Thomas parish. Before this, there were records in 1918, 1966 and 1997, although at the time these wouldn't have been observations of a separate species, or at least they wouldn't have been thought of that way. The Smithsonian Magazine says that the species was first observed in 1889. The IUCN does not mention this, but our 2008 paper does cite it, leading us back to an 1889 paper by H.W. Fielden. Now, I could not find this paper myself to know whether this was listed as a separate species at the time, just not this one, or if the species was mentioned but under a different name, but the citation definitely does exist, so I will leave a reference to it in the show notes in case anyone else has more luck. Regardless, for our purposes, the species was categorised as separate in the early 2000s. Now, you might have noticed that we are talking about a species which earlier I said we thought was lost, not just critically endangered. So why was this species so badly under threat? Well, it's to do with its habitat. L. carlae almost definitely needs secondary forests to survive. Secondary forests are those which are recovering from disturbances but have not yet reached the climax point of succession. Incidentally, for more on ecological succession, see episode 39. Now, there are precious few secondary rainforests left on Barbados. Those that are left are primarily in gullies which are not deemed able to be developed by humans, resulting in a fragmented habitat for the species. Even then, these aforementioned gullies are often employed as landfill sites by locals, so still not great. For some context, let's talk a bit about the state of deforestation in Barbados and why it's ended up the way it has. When a British colony was founded on the island in 1627, it marked the beginning of a shift in ecology. When this colony first began, the whole island was one big rainforest, and may never have been inhabited by humans, with the possible exception of the Arawak people settling or else just swinging by periodically at some point prior. In 1647, a man called Richard Lygon recorded seeing layer upon layer of plantations when he sailed into Carlisle Bay for the very first time, and this observation is emblematic of a problem that we'll dive into. Very rapidly, Barbados became one of the areas of the British Empire with the highest population density. Within 50 years of the first settlement, the British created an environment bent towards humans and wealth generation. Very rapidly, Barbados became one of the areas of the British Empire with the highest population density. Now, the British settlers wanted to create an environment that reminded them more of Britain. They introduced sugar, while the African slaves brought to the island grew cassava, yams and the like on little slivers of land for themselves. Now, this sugar importation is relevant. We get the fastest period of deforestation after 1650, as the population got larger and the production of sugar got more profitable. This is the age of sugar plantation owners. One notorious example of such a Barbados sugar plantation owner is Stede Bonnet, the famous gentleman pirate. He married Mary Allenby in 1709 and had 4 children, a son Allenby born May 17, 1712, sons Edward Bonnet II and Stede Bonnet Jr., and a daughter Mary. His son Allenby Bonnet died at 3 years old in 1715, and this was one of the decisions that led Stede to become a pirate in 1717. He would eventually be tried, convicted, and sentenced to death in 1718 after a career that involves meeting the renowned Blackbeard along the way. However, this is not a podcast about famous pirates, so we'll steer away from this topic. However, I bring up the example of Stede Bonnet as a symbol of the large sugar plantation owners in Barbados who are part of the problem of deforestation. Barbados is now tilted towards a sugar-based economy, moving it away from this entire island rainforest ecosystem we described when the colony was set up. After the year 1665, the rainforest of Barbados only survived in patches. Fast forward to 2020, and only 9.8% of the land area of Barbados is rainforest, let alone secondary rainforest. You can see the problem here. Let's now circle back to the endangered Barbados threadsnake. In the 2020s, it had been almost 20 years since one had been seen, and it had been added to a list of species thought to have disappeared by conservationists on Barbados. However, people did not stop looking for it. In 2025, efforts by the Conserving Barbados' Endemic Reptiles Project led to the Barbados Ministry of the Environment and Natural Beautification sending out a survey. On March 20th, 2025, a Barbados threadsnake was found under a rock. The snake was brought back to the lab and finally identified by a project officer from the Environment Ministry. So, despite what we previously suspected, the Barbados threadsnake is not extinct. Although many Barbados reptile species have gone extinct, and the mere fact of its existence wouldn't say that the species is destined to perpetuate forever, this story is a little beacon of hope and is listed as a reminder of the precious biodiversity that Barbados still has left. So, that brings us to the end of today's episode. From the world's largest snake a few episodes back, to the world's smallest and its current plight and unexpected survival. As always, thank you all for listening. Feel free to get in touch at the show's email address for any questions, comments, or topic suggestions for future episodes. Until next time, have a great week, everyone.